Hey, everybody, and welcome to The Brand Called You. I couldn't be more excited about today's guest, Shivangi Valki. She's an amazing speaker, a consultant, a story coach. But I met Shivangi years ago in Amsterdam when she led one of the most powerful mentoring sessions from a program that she started called Thrive with Mentoring. And it's one of Switzerland's top women to women mentoring organizations. She's a champion of women, and I'm particularly fascinated to talk to her about her latest book called Wonder Woman. It's based on her global platform that supports high skilled immigrant women in living through reinvention. And so I couldn't be happier to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. Yes, I do remember that evening in Amsterdam. That was in the first year of the launch of Thrive with Mentoring. So almost 9 years ago, actually. So it's amazing that you've remembered that. Thrive in the meanwhile has gone to 10 different countries. So yes, started in Switzerland, but in many different countries. And we have in the meanwhile catalyzed thousands of, women to women mentoring relationships. But what I realized, despite doing that, a lot of the women that get attracted to this platform, they are actually high skilled immigrant women. And being a high skilled immigrant woman myself, that seemed like the next thing for me to do. So that's been the book project that I've been on called Wonder Woman. And the book was published in June this year.
Yeah, I mean, I want to stay on that for a minute. It fascinates me because as you know, I wouldn't exactly say immigrant per se, but I was an expat living in the Netherlands as an American. And and therefore I'm super fascinated by what specifically is different for an immigrant woman than it would be for somebody who is native to a country. I mean, what kind of challenges, or is it perhaps because you were an immigrant? Let's start by what inspired you. I mean, because you were an immigrant to Switzerland, and is that was that the genesis of this idea?
Yeah, in many ways, right? So, women, initially, I focused on women that moved from the global south to the global north because I felt that that is a tougher transition as compared to, and it's interesting that you say expat, right? Because, of course, I also thought about that. What is the difference between immigration versus expatriation? Expatriation, when you are supported by your organization that then expats you usually to another country, then a lot of the things they take care of it. They'll take care
Hmm.
of your work permit, they'll take care of your kids' schooling, they'll take care of your housing. That's a very different way to enter a country. And again, I do not, the reason I call it high skilled immigrant women is these are not women that would be refugees, or they're not, so they're usually very highly skilled women in their own native countries, and then they decide, for usually for economic reasons, educational purposes, some of them, but I've really focused on those women who moved abroad and created a career, and actually moved abroad with the desire to create a career, right? And the challenges faced by them, because it's very, very different. The migrant or immigrant label is usually for people who are leaving through difficulties in their country, right? That's not what Wonder Woman talks about. Wonder Woman is really about the creme de la creme in a country that then decides to go and study. For example, the country I come from, India, right? Majority of the people try to go to the US. I know it's changing now, but at least when I was growing up, and when I had the opportunity to probably go abroad, US and UK, they ranked the highest, of course, because they were English speaking. For me, the genesis was that I decided to write a book that I would have loved to have when I was making that decision to move abroad. In my case, I actually came with my husband to Switzerland. Um, I came from an amazing school. I had an amazing job back at home. And I really thought that coming to Switzerland is going to be, great. It's like it's going to be continuing my great journey of career and work. And in my case, that did happen. But what I realized was that that was more the exception than the rule. In the meanwhile, through my platform, Thrive with Mentoring, as I said, 80% of the women in Thrive are actually high skilled immigrant women. Um, some countries it is a bit different, but most countries that's the case. And what I realized is that the challenges that they have as so called trailing spouses, right? I was in many definitions a trailing spouse too, is very, very difficult to integrate into a new country. And especially when the language barrier exists. So in my case, I came to the German part, or people go to the French part, or Danish, or whichever, Dutch. It's far more challenging than going to the US or UK, because the language really can be supportive. But people are usually, and I'm of course focusing on women, but I think the challenge is shared, that a lot of people who migrate to these countries, they are de-skilled. What does that mean? That means they do not usually get roles and jobs and make career which is aligned to their level of education and to their level of expertise or experience. So there is a lot of de-skilling that happens. What I did was I interviewed around 60 women who, despite all of these challenges, have still made it, very successfully in their host countries, right? I call it the host country. And these are women who are CXOs and CEOs, or top of businesses, top of nonprofits, because there is a narrative around migration, and the narrative is quite bleak. And what I wanted to do with Wonder Woman is to acknowledge that there are challenges, yet see and create a path around how do you actually overcome these challenges? What are the mindsets that are needed? I have woven this with memoirish elements around my own journey, to give an illustration of what is possible. And I know that there are various phases. The first 5 years in a host country versus 5 to 15 versus 15 plus. Through my own journey, I know, and it resonated with a lot of my interviewees, that life changes. For the first 5 years, you're just sort of navigating and struggling, and then you are building the next 10 years. And what I call after those 15 plus 5, so after 20 years, or 15 plus years at least, you are probably then thinking about legacy. How do I want to give back, etc., right? For example, Thrive with Mentoring, though it's a completely volunteer-based organization that I created. I don't think I could have ever dreamed of creating something like that in the first 5, 10 years in an organization, in a country. It's only after I established roots here and figured out how things are done, but it's still highly unusual for somebody with my profile to come and create a nonprofit.
There's so many factors, so much to break down in what you just said. So, I mean, the first thing you said was you came with your husband. Does that mean he was offered a job and okay. So the first thing is you had some financial support when you came, which I'm guessing that is not the case for a lot of women. So that was the first thing that you had in place, correct?
Yeah, and more than financial support, I think it's like you have a home to live in, right? And I had a permit. And I had a permit. This visa issues and permit issues are the biggest for high school immigrant women. I happened to come into a country, and my husband, because he had a permanent job, I still needed to prove to the government, whoever gave me the job, because I had a job in the second month. Very unusual, by the way. I didn't realize it then, but now I know this is highly unusual. And that is that his permit allowed me, or gave me a permit which allowed me to look for a job. Because if a lot of immigrants, typically male, I think the proportion is something like 90-10%. 90% of the jobs, the trailing spouse is a woman, right? 10% of the times the trailing spouse will be a man. um, the visa can be limiting, so you can come as a wife or a partner or whatever, but you're not allowed to work in that country. So that was not my problem, and all of these things, I think, you usually people are blissfully unaware of, and especially if you come like I did, with a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, the best HR school and in biomedical engineering, all of these things, and then being in great jobs in your home countries, you sort of underplay that. And of course, these countries, that's why I said I focused initially from global south to global north. There was this whole, and I think it's changing again, the whole developing country to developed country, you're going to a safer country, and all of that narrative very much exists, and it is true. But now I have seen enough stories and enough challenges of people who would have rather been happier, better, and maybe even more at peace if they had just stayed at home.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting question, which is my next one, which is, isn't it very specific, very culturally specific, i.e., does it matter what culture you come from and to which country you're in as to how they'll behave with you? So, for example, I also lived in Switzerland. My father did his sabbatical there. Um, do you think the fact that, we were American, and I don't know, I wonder, like, do you think the Swiss, for example, might have a different way of viewing people with a different, like, who are from India or from a culture which is so different from their own, or a religion which is so. I mean, I'm wondering how much does the culture, the pervading culture that you're entering into affect the ability to absorb you and treat you differently or this.
Usually, right? I call it the unholy trinity. And the
What?
unholy
I'm sorry.
trinity, the unholy trinity. I call it the unholy trinity. You know, in India, we have the concept of the holy trinity. And I call the intersectionality of biases for high skilled immigrant women the unholy trinity. Because
Okay.
it is about gender for sure, but ethnicity plays a role. And with
Yeah.
ethnicity comes skin color and all the other things that go under ethnicity, right? So it's not that, and usually when what I mean by ethnicity is that these things by intersectionality is that these things they sort of compound each other, right? So you have gender, you have ethnicity bias, and then you have the anti-immigration bias, you know. And under ethnicity there are many different, like you can break it down into many things, right? Skin color being the most obvious, then there is religion, then there is social standing or rank, you know, the way you dress. I mean, there's like so many things that go under that whole bucket that I call ethnicity. The anti-immigration bias changes according to countries. Now, I've lived in Switzerland for 25 years, so I can give you the example here. And so many women, by the way, who came from Eastern Europe, so this is also global north, right? But from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, actually, they have written back to me saying they associate with most of the things that I mentioned in the book, right? So
Interesting.
I actually, my starting point was global south to global north, right? So it was more like from Asia or Africa or, you know, India, like all of those countries. But it seems that the biases remain similar. The bias which might be different is your skin is white, you know. And I have actually seen, so there is like generically speaking, it seems to me that the immigration bias, the first, you know, like it's the cover of the book, right? Like, what color are you? What color is your skin? And I have heard from my African friends as compared to, let's say, my other Indian friends who are like, for an Indian, I'm still relatively light skinned and apparently Spanish looking. So I have not faced some of these things that even, you know, very good Indian friends of mine would face, who would be much darker or, you know, have features that sort of, you know, make them very Asian Indian looking.
What about your accent? You're in German. When you speak German, do they pick up on that, and is that a problem?
So, fortunately for me, not. I learned Sanskrit as a young person, and so if I speak German, you will not pick up the fact that I might not be born here. So I don't have much of an accent.
Hmm.
Um, if I speak French, you'll pick it up in 3 minutes. But German works for me because I've studied the language and I studied the pronunciation, right? French was very like superficial, and then you can make out that I'm not a French speaker. But coming back to, you know, so there is skin, there is language, the way you speak language, but there's also the way you dress up, you know, and then which circles do you move in? So being in corporate, both me and my husband, as I said, I started working in corporate in the second month, and always, you know, my career trajectory went that way. You then move in completely different circles of people where there is a lot of international people. So
Hmm.
coming back to your question around, you know, would you be treated differently if you're an American versus an Indian? Not so much if you were an in a corporate, you know, like I think corporates treat Indians and Americans similarly. But if you were, I'm thinking what could be another interesting role. Yeah, if you were an Indian and you came and started a restaurant here, you know, an Indian restaurant, let's say, versus an American who came here to teach English, let's say, then probably you will have very different experiences of life in Switzerland because people look at you, I feel, from the lens also not just of your ethnicity, but also your function, right? And your job and your social status. And at the end of the day, also your power to buy things, right? So money power. So there are just so many things. And what happens then, as I said, you top it up with gender and then you top it up with anti-immigration. So probably the Swiss are less concerned about Americans immigrating to Switzerland, to be honest, they're also less concerned about Indians immigrating to Switzerland
Yeah.
versus some of the East European countries
Yes.
immigrating to Switzerland. So there
Why?
are
Why?
these
Why?
biases. Yeah.
Why?
Um, it's a little bit like, why is there bias against black men in America? Why? There is some reason and there is some rhetoric. So I think that the reason in Switzerland is that there is a lot of crime because of, immigration of high numbers of East American people. Or there might be the narrative around they are taking away our jobs and they are here on an illegal status and doing jobs for lesser money, in many ways, and it's changing in Switzerland, but in many ways, it's a little bit like a luxury liner, and people are not very fond of, somebody sitting next to them who doesn't belong to that kind of a luxury liner experience. Those are the stories that I hear, right?
Yeah.
But it's really about some real experience that people have had, and then a lot of rhetoric, and then of course politics and anti-immigration gets mixed into that, right? So depending on your political leaning, you might have another narrative that goes into that, and especially the narratives around unemployment is increasing. Switzerland, everything is smaller, right? But for example, if I look at the UK and Brexit, that was such a strong narrative that the East Europeans are coming and doing here jobs for 1/10 of what a Brit would do, and then that's why there are no jobs for Brits. That kind of narrative. I think there is sort of a smaller, weaker version of that exists in Switzerland too.
When I moved to the Netherlands, I did it by myself. I didn't have any employer bringing me there. But I look like the Dutch. I'm the same, primarily I mean, I could pass if I didn't open my mouth. But still, I found when I became a consultant in the corporate world, a story coach, um, I was I was so embarrassed by things that I didn't understand. For example, in America, you're kind of rewarded if you share what you're feeling publicly and in a group. The first thing I had to do in the Netherlands was have people work one on one, and never as a group, because they would feel so shamed at the idea of being outed. In other words, your personal feelings are just that, and it's nobody else's business. The whole idea of individuating, even something like going to a restaurant and saying, could you put my salad on the side, would get eyebrows from people who would say, you're so American. How dare you, ask for something individual. And these are such nuanced things that I couldn't have been prepared for. And I wonder, you said that, in your book, these are tips that you wish you had had. What are some of the strategies, the more nuanced strategies that you can give these women to help them make the shift?
Buy the book. But
Give us a little tip and a
apart
trick.
from buying the book, yeah, no, I think it's really about reading the culture, right? Whichever culture that you are in. And I do not zero in on a culture. There is enough information available on different kinds of cultures that you might immigrate into as a high skilled immigrant woman, right? But it's really about reading the culture, for example, of the organization that you are in, because the nuances are much beyond just the country culture. There are also so many cultural challenges that are specific to an organization, right? So it's really about reading and assimilating, and a lot of especially if you go as a part of an organization, you get training on this sort of stuff, right? So it's intercultural understanding, reading books and listening to podcasts. So basically, not trying to keep away from making, let's say, the blatant faux pas that are looked down upon in a culture. What you have mentioned is something far more subtle. Um, and even if people might have this take on it, saying, oh, she's so American, or, people have not said many times to me, actually, you're so Indian, because I'm actually not very stereotypical Indian. I'm like you, I challenge things, I openly talk about things, etc. Whereas the stereotypical Indian would be quieter in a room, especially internationally. And usually belongs to somebody from IT or finance, right? So as an HR, as a story coach, as a leadership trainer, as a talent management professional, I was not I was not the usual stereotype. So nobody could actually fit me into that stereotype. So what I had to do, I got a lot of feedback in the beginning of my career saying that I'm very direct and I'm very challenging. And I think that there was a bias inbuilt in that because most Indian professionals they knew were not so direct, and were not so challenging. And that
Mm,
is where I also go in many ways, contrary to what people say about Indians in general, right? If you look at, we are very hierarchical, but we are very respectful, and usually we would not be very challenging as a culture, as it's not, it's, I wouldn't say it's a collectivist culture necessarily, like nothing like China or Japan, but there is a lot of cadence paid to the fact that, there is consensus and you do things together, right? And I was individuating and I had my own strong opinions. So I feel that when you go to a country, your best bet is to understand more theoretically what are, sort of the cultural norms, but you would actually read, just like we teach during when you're telling a story that you read the room, you actually read the culture
mm,
of an
mm,
organization. You speak to people. This is where mentors help tremendously. You speak to mentors talking about, okay, so how does somebody get even successful in this organization? How is somebody perceived to be likable? How is somebody perceived to be, somebody who gets things done versus somebody who just talks about things? Like, what is it? Are having meetings important, or is that considered a waste of time? All of these are so nuanced that there is
mm,
no, real specific answer that I can offer. And what I'm trying to do also in Wonder Woman, Lisa, is that I am asking a lot of questions. I'm
mm.
helping people to identify the key questions that they must ask,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
because the answers are literally, so varied. Today with AI, you can go and ask a lot of these questions to GPT specific to your very specific situation, right? And if your organization does a lot of publishing online, you can even get a taste of, okay, so what is the organizational brand saying and what is the organizational story saying versus what is my lived experience of being in this
Yeah.
organization, in this community, in this country, whatever your context is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's really a mix, but remaining curious and not jumping to conclusion. I
Yeah.
think that is very helpful because on the one hand, we say that your host country may be biased against you, but what about your biases towards people in that country, right? Because bias really works both ways. It's not just one way. And if you just look at, things from their lens and try and, remain curious about not not just focusing on what are people doing, but why are people doing this, it can become very fascinating then, to think through that. And then you also feel a little less defensive, you also feel a little
Yeah.
more open, you also feel a little bit more forgiving, whatever is needed to
I love
help you then navigate those
that.
challenges.
I love that. I always feel like I know for me personally, um, major life choices were usually informed by there was always one really profound incident that kind of pushed me in a direction. And I feel like from little I know of you, although I know some, I feel like one of the major things in your life was getting fired after you came back from maternity leave. And is that accurate? I mean, was that one of the
That
biggest?
is accurate. That is the genesis of so many different things in my life. One, moving out of corporate, not immediately, but very soon after moving out of corporate to start my own business, because that is the decision which was so arbitrary in my mind that made me decide I'm never going to let a single corporate define, how my career trajectory looks like. The genesis of Thrive with Mentoring is also exactly that incident because after being made redundant on the first day back of my maternity leave, which would be illegal in many countries, but not here because I had taken 6 months instead of the mandatory 4 months. So I was already outside the legal maternity leave. And again, I was made redundant, though I dramatically call it fired. I was not fired. I was told that the job does not exist. And there is absolutely no protection for that in Switzerland, even for highly qualified people. Now, I'm talking about 2012, so that's 13 years back. Today, is the norm, unfortunately. So many people are getting fired left, right, center, and it's a very high cost country, and it's very, very difficult for people who've lived here, immigrants who've lived here for 20 years, to just go and live somewhere else because they just got so adjusted to the life here, right? But nobody blinks an eye anymore because it's like 30% of an organization got cut, 3,000 people were laid off. Like these are news that we are listening to every second day. completely changed after COVID, right? Whereas 13 years back, this was really shocking. This was like so unusual and so unbelievable and all of that. Like I had nothing to I had nobody to speak to. Nobody was writing about these kind of things. Nobody was talking about these kind of things, right? And I went and talked about it in my own TEDx 3 years back. But it took me a long time to actually, because especially, and I was a high skilled immigrant woman in many ways, I was also on that career trajectory as a high potential, right? So for me, the only thing I knew was how to get promoted and how to get the next best job. This was my career till that moment. And then even this job where I got fired from, I was headhunted into that job after 10 rounds of interviews. And I had a phenomenal performance review before I went on my maternity leave. So nothing just added up. It all seemed so random in my mind that I was like, okay, you just have to accept this, not, like depersonalize it and move on. But
Was it, you think it was because you took the extra 2 months or?
no, 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 it was not unrelated to
Okay.
that. I don't think, well, okay, not fully unrelated. I had a little bit of a discussion because my direct manager did not want to give me that extra 2 months,
Yeah.
and we had to go to her manager, and
Right.
her manager approved it. So maybe there is some element
Right.
of that. But I don't think the decision was made based on that. But there was some element of, okay, she has challenging my authority. Maybe there is an element of that. I like to think that it was an economic decision, because I was in Switzerland. The organization could have done the same role in cheaper countries, so they were in Paris and in Brussels, and the same job could be done in a different place. And also because the person who hired me had left and there was another person.
Right.
So management economic decision, I think, is the reason, with a little bit of twist of, okay, she's challenging my authority, but I don't think that was the reason to because you're, at the end of the day, it is a very expensive, short-term, very expensive decision, right, for the organization. Because for 1 full year that I have not worked, I was in a senior role, so they have to pay me a 6 month severance minimum, even though I had just started before going on maternity. So it's a very expensive decision, and I don't think anybody would justify it based on
Right.
based on a petty
Right.
reason, right? Okay, she challenged my authority, right? So it was an economic decision. But having said that, I think I could have literally gone, down the spiral, but for my mentor. I think my mentor really, and she was a woman mentor who understood that I had this 6 months small baby and this existential crisis, right? Because my whole life was sort of ambitious career, high skilled person. That's my entire identity. So when such a thing happens, it's like an existential crisis, right? And I think she really helped me to delineate that, right? She really helped me to depersonalize the problem. She said, it's really not about you, it's really about the system. And what do you want to do about that, And at the same time, being so empathetic about the baby at home and all of that, right? So that was in some ways, again, the genesis of Thrive with Mentoring, because I saw the magic of women to women mentoring, because so much that was unsaid was already understood by another woman. And it was not understood cognitively, but actually in her bones, right? And that was really my idea. I said, and I had many mentors, and I had created mentoring and coaching programs inside corporates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Majority of the mentors, surprise, surprise, were men. Why? Because they were in senior roles, and people in mentors in organizations are usually in senior roles. So there was a bias in the mentoring pool, 80-20, 80% male, 20% female. And then I had also been a part of some conversations where some senior leaders would actually, especially if the mentor was nomination based, would say about a woman saying, oh, I know she's taken the role, but I'm not sure she's ready to be a mentor yet, maybe next year. So I was also privy to those kind of conversations. And so I had this thing in me to like democratize mentoring, because I knew that it's such a powerful tool, and there is no reason for anybody to be nominated to be a mentor. So that's what Thrive with Mentoring does, right? It
Mm-hmm.
says if you are 15 years work ex, because I do want somebody who's seen life a bit, and
Right.
be, and if you're ready to pay it forward, to a younger person, and you have people management responsibility, put self-select, nominate yourself. You don't need to be going through any other system. So yeah, it's somehow that pivotal, let's say, incident in my life led to me moving from corporate to founding my own business. to start a nonprofit. Became a topic of my TEDx, and becomes a perennial story that is going to be always linked when I do work with many different women that have been, and men, to be honest. I mean, my work is very gender agnostic now, um, who have been wronged in some way, right? And feel who might be stuck in that, victim
Mhm.
space. I came so quickly out of that victim space. In the third month of my 6 months, severance, so not severance, what it's called, garden leave, 6 months garden leave. In the third month, after taking the first interview, I already had my next job, right? So because I didn't immediately jump, I think it was all too much for me with a small baby to suddenly say, because I knew that as an entrepreneur, your paycheck is going to be nowhere like corporate, at least not in the first 3 to 5 years. So it was not such an easy decision for me. I had made the decision, but I still went and took one last job, and then I did it. And that last job, I entered it so differently. I almost was like an external consultant already in my mindset. And I flourished in that job, right? Because I did not buy into the prevailing narrative in this new job of people being, they're very critical about the culture, etc. And I wasn't, and I was so positive that I actually got three jobs, one after the other, or let's say three roles being put one after the other,
Mhm.
because I was just getting things done, and with a smile, and I was generally contributing a lot, effective, efficient, because I literally had nothing to lose, right? They were very interesting, especially for somebody like me, because I had done a lot of work on employer branding. And I usually had a lot of psychological contracting with the employer that I would take a job with. But in the last job, I was completely free of all of that, right? I was a free agent. Yes, I was working for this employer, but I knew very well that I will not work for any employer very soon. And that made me so effective because I said exactly the things the way they are. And in the meanwhile, I had also, gained some skills around how to lead crucial conversations. So I always said what needed to be said, but the how I got better and better at. And I think that made me really effective in that role.
How did you climb out of how did you pivot from victim so quickly? Was there a strategy? Was it just your force of will? Was it something your mentor said that transported you from victim to somebody who is, a more proactive spirit?
One is that I really inside me believed that there was nothing about me that could have changed this situation.
Mhm.
Because as a victim, I said things like, oh, maybe I should have taken only 4 months and things would have been different. Or, oh, maybe if I had, because I had a boss who hadn't had children, so I had said things like, oh, maybe if there was a boss who had children, they would be different. And I just realized that all of this maybe and wishful thinking is not going to change anything in my life, right? But I think what my mentor helped me was with the mindset of self belief. I talk a lot about that. It's really that, when circumstances happen to you, and I know that it might sound pithy, put out of context, but I really shifted my mindset from thinking of this is not happening to me but happening for me. I really shifted my mindset, right?
Wow.
All the actions that I took were aligned to that. I kept thinking, so what is the gift in this? What is the gift in this, right?
I
And
love that.
creation of the nonprofit, creation, starting my own business, taking and becoming a coach for then high skilled immigrant women and men. All of that is a gift of that incident, right? But that is the shift. And I think though my mentor didn't put that in so many words at that time, I think what she instilled in me was, Shivangi, this is a great story, but nothing else, like nothing has changed in your skill set. Nothing has changed in the way that you do work. If anything, because of having this little bit of a setback, you are going to be more relatable, more human. Because to be honest, and you probably have experienced that in me, I have a way of, I have what they call in psychology a winner script. I don't know if you've heard of that. A winner script, people with a winner script, they actually are able to reframe any situation to their advantage. And this is psychological, right? So it's also at a very subconscious level that you do that. That is something that I was born with. That's not something that
I
was
was going to
created
ask
with.
you where you got if that was fueled by for example, your spiritual practices or your parents or
I
like because
think it's my
I tend
upbringing,
to
so
be
not spiritual practice. I think it is my upbringing. I
Yeah.
think my mom, from a very, very young age, instilled in me the belief and also made it possible, right? Not just the belief. She made it possible through all means that she had, that you can do whatever you want and you can be whoever you want. As an Indian young girl, to be an engineer. And then again, even in engineering, I go and do a very specific kind of engineering called biomedical engineering, because in India, you either become a doctor or an engineer, maths engineer, biology doctor. And I was great at both. And my mom discovered, there's biomedical engineering, which needs both. I would go and do that. I top the class. And then I decide during the last year of engineering that I absolutely love leadership development. I was actually working as an intern in Siemens, and I got exposed to management development. And I got exposed to some international trainers, as an intern, just attending like fly in the wall. And I was like, oh my God, sitting there and thinking, that's what I want to become. And then can you imagine, after all that private education, very expensive in biomedical engineering, I go and tell my mom, you know what? I know that I topped it, and I know that most of these, fellow students, they're going to the US mainly at that time. John Hopkins going to do their
Yeah.
PhD. That was the typical way a biomedical engineer's career would develop. And I was telling her I want to drop all of this, and now I want to do a master's in HR. And I explained to her why, and I said this was very motivating. And you know what she said? Sure, sure, let's do that. Let's see how to make it possible. So I went and took lecturer's job in my own college, because as a top student it was easy for me to go, and I went and taught biological control systems and microprocessors. And my logic was that it's still teaching. Yes, it's technical skills, but it's still teaching, which is close to training. That's what I mean by a winner script. I can twist everything
Oh,
to work, in the way that it works for me. And then went and took this very competitive exam, because in India it's very competitive to get into the best business schools. And I got into the best HR school called TISS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. That created this chip on the shoulder, right? Biomedical engineer, etc. It's very humbling to come to a new country, as you might have experienced, because nobody knew what is TISS. Nobody cared about my biomedical
right.
engineering.
But you might have just given me an unexpected gift because I'm about to sell a house I've owned for 21 years, and all I keep thinking about is I made a mistake, I made a mistake, and I'm sad, I'm losing everything. And I want to hear that line again that you just said to me, which is, what is the gift? Tell me that line again.
So really thinking about, life in terms of not why is this happening to me, but why is this happening for me? That shift from happening to me has a very victim embedded in it. Whereas happening for me is very empowering. If you think about how is this helping you to be the version of you, like getting free of this house of 21 years, and there may be some regret, etc., associated with it. But now what is that going to allow you to do? What levers of freedom can you then pull because of not having this property and this house, etc., right? It's a very interesting shift, because any experience, if you keep looking at the gift in the experience, like if you focus your energies on, what is the gift in this, what is the gift in this, rather than, oh my God, why did this happen and I'm so sad about it. Because and I'm not, by the way, I do not at all talk about positive toxicity, right? What is it? Toxic positivity. Sorry, toxic positivity. I am not a great person in terms of affirmations, etc., by the
No,
way.
I know. I
I
could see
know
that.
I know the benefit of that, but I don't do affirmations. I've never done.
Yeah.
I don't do that. So, but I am very able, as I said, to look at it comes from my ability to look at something from many different angles and lenses. So having a very diverse view on that same question, right? So if you just think about what is not working on something, then you'll just feel low energy. Whereas if you think about something has not worked, but now what is the benefit of that not working?
I
That
love.
then something else emerges out of it, right?
Yeah, you know what? We have to end on that amazing note. I cannot believe we talked for 45 minutes, but
Wow, did we? Oh my God.
you left me and the viewers with such a gift in that just in that one small gem, which I know is only a sliver of what you offer in both your workshops, your training,
Yes, yes. And
and
you
your
know what?
book.
I wanted to show you, I should have picked this up sooner, but that is Wonder Woman.
And
And
we
I
will.
just wanted to show you the cover of that because that actually evokes a lot of, feelings in people. And I did not want to, like, initially I started with the global south to north, right? But then I just wanted to make it like sort of neutral colored and beautiful. But those are little swallows, little migrating birds
So
there.
beautiful. We're gonna put a link to it on the website, and I can't thank you enough, and I'm so looking forward to following you and hearing more about your progress and with the book and everything else. So I really
It
thank
was
you.
so lovely to speak to you, Lisa. Thanks for reconnecting. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what else, where else this conversation can be taken. I'm
Thank
always
you
looking
so
forward.
much, Shivangi. It's so good to talk to you. All right,
Thank
all the
you. Thank
best.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.